let's get into this episode. Episode number 1.
The inaugural episode of Comedy Nerd Out.
That's right. We'll go ahead and we'll cut past our hosting, which was basically too hot to handle. It's melted the memory card, but we switched another one in and we got it for you. So we'll let you know right now what you can expect to see in this episode. Coming up first is Mr. Bryan Lubu Roberts. He's an improviser that I've been performing with for nearly a decade here in Austin. We were on a group called Look Cookie together, and he has a tremendous voice, if I may say, both conceptually as an artist, as well as just like the timbre of his voice.
Yes.
It's just tremendous. So I really think you'll enjoy him.
So creative. Like, he's just a blast to improvise with, and like where his mind goes is inspiration.
Yeah, he's a great talented sketch writer. He writes with Ghetto Sketch Warlock, the Tastemakers, Fuck It's Hot. So just all over the Austin community.
That's right.
Performing.
He directs currently the Armando team Decoy out of Cold Town Theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really does so much. I kind of need to send a thank you to Bryan as well. Coming up after him, we have Mr. Janik. He's an improviser. He's a co-owner of the Hideout Theater in Austin, Texas. He's also been performing with his group Parallelogram of Phonograph, P-Graph, for nearly a decade now.
They tour the world teaching and performing. A really super amazing, talented group of performers. They are awesome, and he is a mainstay of the AIC and the Austin Improv community.
And basically just like one of the nicest guys.
Yeah.
So we appreciate him speaking as well. And then closing out the evening, we have Mr. John Ratliff, a genius of the Austin Improv community, a terrific improviser, a faculty member at Cold Town. I've known him for as long as I've been doing improv at Cold Town. He also teaches, directs groups there. He has a feverish dedication to grounded 2-person scenes.
Thank goodness, yes. We appreciate that.
Yeah, Ratliff is my sort of guiding light sometimes when I get lost. I'm just like, what would Ratliff do? He's a very nice, trustworthy, pure, respectful opinion of improv. So,
absolutely
glad to be able to share that with you as well.
He's also an amazing musician. And speaking of musicians, today's featured musician is Justin Swallow.
That's right. Another performer at Cold Town, but just a tremendous musician. Probably been playing music for longer than I've been known that he's been doing improv or acting, but he's an actor as well. But he has several albums out. You can visit his website, his Bandcamp, justinswallow.bandcamp.com for more of his music. You can check him out there. So that's all we need to let you know about. Let's get into this first episode. Here's your first speaker, Mr. Bryan Lubu Roberts.
Good evening. The name of my topic is You Suck Forever. Thoughts on improv nihilism. Allow me, if you will, to start with a confession. I was asked to do one of these talks, and I agreed to it without really thinking about what I actually had to say about improv. I don't coach often, and I've never taught an improv class in my life. It occurred to me, thinking about this, that I may not actually believe in improv at all. I've spent 10 years watching other people do improv and talk about improv and perform and speak with such a passion about it as I just politely nod my head and say, yeah, cool, man, oh, that's so interesting, my friend. Not that I'm degrading what you love, not at all. It makes me happy to see someone slosh around in a wading pool of positivity. But I looked at things differently. I think I look at improv the way David Mamet looked at acting. Mamet will reduce acting to simply the actions of the actor. There's no work before or after the performance. You get up in front of people, you remain truthful to yourself, and you go home. If you're lucky, you've sliced off a bit of your personality and offered it to the audience like pizza. Did I then actually believe in improv? Do I really give a shit? So I spent some time looking at the many nihilistic opinions I had about improv to see how I really felt. I actually wanted to refer to the way I felt as improv atheism, but I don't think that really captures it. Not just thinking something negative, taking it at face value and moving on. The following is a collection of these random meanderings into my brain. Number 1, you suck. I am perpetually under the impression that I suck at improv. You might notice this if you've ever told me I did a good show. I do what I can to smile at you and thank you for coming, but generally I think that you're just being nice and trying to feed my ego for reasons that I can't possibly fathom. The only thing that brings me solace in times like these is that you also suck. I mean, you suck. I know you totally thought you crushed it, but you sucked. Everyone sucks, though, so you shouldn't feel bad either. Isn't that kind of the point of improv anyways? To suck? We tell each other that failure is awesome and that we beat ourselves up after shows that didn't go well because so-and-so missed your offer, and then all of a sudden you were in space and you slept with an alien. My God, how could you have sucked so bad? Frankly, it brings me great joy to watch people suck. The only thing that turns me off is when you suck, and then you realize that you are sucking, and you get that dead look in your eyes, like your dreams are all dying and you'll never be funny again. What is wrong with you, my friend? Just by sucking, you're being funny. Right now. You might as well enjoy how much you suck. Every troupe on Earth is going to suck. A lot. There are no exceptions. But what separates good troupes from great troupes is how much you enjoy yourself on stage, regardless of how badly you will suck. And you will suck. You will suck forever. Number 2, classes are a scam. This is probably more for people at a certain point in their improv education, and I think this is one of those things that make budding improvisers leave improv before they have fully blossomed. Either way, I want you to think about this now. You pay hundreds of dollars to take classes, and in these classes you learn rules. Rules to an art form that you thought to be devoid of rules before you even set foot in the class. And on top of that, you watch shows where these rules are constantly being broken. And you think to yourself, well, I saw those guys ask each other questions, but you're giving me notes about asking questions. This is a fucking scam. I'm out. It's not that you're asking questions. It's that you're a fucking rook. And when fucking rooks get asked questions, they try to come up with the funniest answer they can. Where'd the tennis balls go? Oh, they went to Mars, man. With a talking lion named Junganga. Ha ha, hilarious. You were told that questions hold up the scene, but they only hold up the scene if you are unwilling to simply answer the question in front of you. You could have just said the tennis balls were in the garage. No, it's not funny, but it gets you to the garage, where maybe you find out your daughter is banging a tennis pro. On the other side of the coin, you might be such a rook that all of your dialogue is questions, which prevents you from adding anything to the scene yourself, because God forbid you actually sacrifice some dignity by taking a risk. And that's why the rules are there, because you need to get used to sucking. And maybe that's at the core of why people walk away from improv. Like Cthulhu, they saw the true extent of their sucking and were nearly driven mad. So maybe classes aren't the scam. Maybe you're the scam. Maybe your mother is the scam. By which I mean, she scammed you all your life by telling you that you didn't suck. Number 3, warm-ups are stupid. I'll say this publicly because I've said this in private conversation for years. I don't think warm-ups do that much for me. I've gone on stage cold and done the same kind of shows that I would have done warm. However, I feel that the day I have is going to be reflected on stage, and standing in a circle snapping in unison with other people isn't going to change my general mood. If I have baggage, I bring it on stage. If I want to murder someone from earlier in the day, I will try to play a murderer. And if I feel guilty about not walking my dog, I will play a neglectful parent. And if I got laid, I would play a guy who got laid by 3 women at once. But warm-ups aren't about me. Warm-ups are about me. The universal me, the group me. I'm only one part of me. And when I get on stage, I need to be able to work as a complete unit. So I have to form a connection with other people who may be worried about things like being judged or feeling shame. Separate me from the group me, and it's a totally different situation. I have no shame. My parents have seen me do things that are probably illegal. And not drugs illegal, but like sex illegal. They saw me suck a blow pop from between the toes of a woman who was showing the audience her vagina. I'm pretty sure the hideout has never been zoned for that kind of thing. Maybe the problem isn't with other people who need warm-ups. Maybe the problem is that I, the guy who doesn't need warm-ups, has no self-respect. So warm-ups aren't about me. But I promise you that if we are doing improv together, I will do any goddamn warm-up you want to do. Firstly, because I want you to think that I'm normal. But more importantly, I want you to trust me on stage. We're going to suck, but we're going to suck together. Number 4. There's only one way to improvise, and every other way is a waste of time. I remember joining Giggle Pants in 2004 and doing comedy sports and thinking that it was the be-all, end-all. Oh man, this is the best. I can give the audience exactly what they want in the form of puns and bits based off all the current movies and music. They love it because they recognize it. And I love it because it's so damn easy to do. It's fish in a barrel. All this other improv is artsy-fartsy, pretentious theater guys who care more about making you cry than making you laugh. These shows are supposed to be a forgetting place. Doing narrative shows in 2006. This is the best. Shows that just make people laugh, but also they feel the full spectrum of human emotion. It's the kind of stuff that stays with you after you leave the theater. All this other improv is cheap comedy bits. Those other guys can dance like monkeys for all the bananas they want, but I'm going to stay true to my art. Doing Chicago style in 2010. I'm funny as fuck. And it's not like before where I just said things like, my wife, and people laughed. These are deep belly laughs that come from the truth of my character. And not only that, but I don't have to try and force emotional content like giving my character cancer or a dead wife. I'm taking risks with myself and they're paying off. Fuck those cheap laugh bitches and fuck those pretentious assholes. I wasn't even fucking alive before now. The boy has become the man. And now in 2015, I realize that I'm a flaky, flighty son of a bitch. My past selves were all right, but also, they were all wrong. This is the dilemma that has surely plagued many practitioners of improv. Minnesota improviser Joe Bernard will tell you that there are no schools of improv, that there's only one school of you, which I like to imagine is a giant globule of improv knowledge from which you can extract what you need. And maybe, using various combinations of things you've learned, you can discover something new. People may tell you that there's nothing new to learn, but here's what I think. I'm going to use a metaphor that I saw in the early 90s movie, The Pistol. This movie was about basketball, but I think it applies just as well to improv. You see this circle? The size of the circle represents everything known about improv. But the size of the ball represents everything about improv that hasn't even been discovered yet. This dot represents what we know. Combined! I look back over these thoughts that I have and I realize that, of course, I'm not actually nihilistic about improv. But I wonder how easily people can fall into the trap of feeling this way from time to time. I mean, if you really think about it, we deal in nothingness. This is the medium we have chosen. We flirt constantly with the void. I would like to think it is perfectly natural to feel this way from time to time, but there is something there. Of course there is. We aren't here to be famous. We aren't here for money. Sometimes we aren't even here because it's fun. We're here because we can find nothing else worth our time. This is a thing so amazing that we have chosen to devote ourselves to it, even when the chance of material gain is next to nothing. Because there is something amazing in the doing, isn't there? There's nothing here when we arrive, yet through imagination and sheer force of will, we create something before we leave, and if we believe in it enough, we can make other people see it too. You can all do it. You're all capable of it, and yet you sit here frittering about how much you suck. I'd like to close with an anecdote from the Zen canon. In case you're curious, I got this anecdote from a Grand Theft Auto Vice City walkthrough, which teaches you specifically how to beat the game's ambulance challenge. Possibly the greatest game walkthrough I've ever read. Talk to me about it after the show if you'd like to read it yourself. Whenever anyone asked him about Zen, the great master Gute would quietly raise one finger into the air. A boy in the village began to imitate this behavior. Whenever he heard people talking about Gute's teachings, he would interrupt the discussion and raise his finger. Gute heard about the boy's mischief. When he saw him in the street, he seized him and cut off his finger. The boy cried and began to run off, but Gute called out to him. When the boy turned to look, Gute raised his finger in the air. At that moment, the boy became enlightened. Thank you.
Mr. Bryan Roberts. All right. Cool. So coming up next, Justin Swallow is going to play a song for us. And if you want to find more music, it's justinswallow.com, right? Soileau, right? Cool. Take it away, Justin.
You know I'd never lie to you. Lie, 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 lie. You know I'd never lie to you, only if I had to. They're only schemes to get what I need from you. So don't believe all the flatteries are true. You know I'd never take from you. La, 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 la. You know I'd never steal from you, only if I had to. They're only schemes to get what I need from you. So don't believe all the flatteries are true. They're only schemes to get what I need from you. So don't believe all the flatteries are true.
So far, everybody. Coming up next to the stage, we have, please welcome Mr. Roy Janik.
Thanks. Awesome. Hey, everybody.
There's a teacher of improv called Keith Johnstone who inspired a lot of the improv that we teach at the Hideout. And one of the things that he recommends for the start of a show is that you lower the audience's expectations of what's going to happen. So I'd like to do that now. These are a bunch of thoughts I've had about the idea of inspiration and what that means and how you feed the spark of inspiration that comes. I don't know if this is going to be anything that's new to you or thoughts that you haven't had before, but these are the things that are rattling around in my brain, so let's just go with that. So lately I've become kind of obsessed with physical metaphors for things in improv, not just thinking of something like inspiration as a spark, but like physically trying to kind of see it. And that's what I'm going to be kind of talking about today. So like, for instance, there's another idea I have of like an energy ball and imagining what that ball actually looks like. And you kind of think of it as the focus of a scene. So if you have two people doing a scene and they're talking about the past, then you visualize the energy ball kind of drifting into the past behind them somewhere vaguely. Or if it becomes a really vague conversation, maybe the energy ball like expands really large. If they talk about the future, it's over there. And then if they talk about the playground, it teleports over to the playground. The idea being that you want to keep that ball like tight, small, and in between the two people on stage, whatever that means to you. So that stuff, that's kind of the way my brain is working right now. So hopefully that makes some sense to any of you. Cool. I want to talk about inspiration as being a spark, and that's not a new idea at all. We always say spark of inspiration, but I want to like imagine it as actual physical thing, because I am convinced that you can actually physically see it on stage, and more importantly, on the sidelines of the stage. So, but first I want to talk about judgment, because there's a lot of judgment in improv, and it's mostly self-judgment. So whenever I'm doing a show and I'm not completely in the zone, the thoughts that run through my head are, is what I'm doing too ridiculous? Am I laughing too much? Am I killing the show by doing what I'm doing right now? Does the audience get this? Should I do the thing I want to do? Should I have done it? I should have done it. And those are but if you can quiet that internal dialogue in your head, you can actually feel these sparks hitting you. And I do mean that you can actually see them and you can feel them. And somehow if you and your scene partners can feed those into a flame, all the stupid voices in your head go away. So, because I feel like there's a really big difference between a show that is inspired and a show that is not. Because I think you can do a good show that is not inspired. You can make the audience laugh, you can get through it, you can heighten, you can have a good variety in your scenes and then get to the end of it. But if your show isn't inspired, the whole thing feels like work. And at the end, you're like, that was good, but it felt like work. But the shows that are inspired, you don't remember what happened. 30 minutes goes by in 2 seconds in your brain, and at the end, you're like, what was that? Because everyone was kind of carried away by this spark that roared into this fire and just burned through 30 minutes in no time's flat. Or in my case, 65 minutes, because don't know when to end a show. Anyway. So that's what I feel is the difference between a show that's inspired and a show that's not. And I don't know about you, but like once you experience a kind of show that feels completely effortless, you're always kind of chasing that, and that's what you want. So where do these sparks of inspiration come from, and what the hell do I mean by the fact that you can see them? So the most obvious physical manifestation of that is someone on the sidelines of the stage. If you have a chance to, and if you haven't already, find a way to coach a group or teach a class, or at the very least, if you're in a workshop or a class and you're not currently on stage and there's a bunch of people up on stage, watch the sidelines. Someone will be standing on the side, something will happen in the scene that they immediately know what to do, and they'll do this weird shuffle step where they almost go on stage, but then they don't. And it looks super awkward, which is why it's good that there's curtains on the wings now. But what it is that your brain is super smart. It can work without you thinking consciously at all. And these sparks of inspiration travel immediately to your feet. And you start moving before you've rationalized what you're even doing. And then, unfortunately, there is enough time from the sidelines to the stage where your brain goes, wait, what the hell am I doing? And you can stop yourself from actually getting on the stage. And that's, so the idea of following your feet is just that, like, if you find yourself moving, to allow yourself the permission to actually move on stage. Eventually, when you're on stage, you'll figure out why the hell you were inspired in the first place. That idea, by the way, first came to me through a book called Acting on Impulse by Carol Hazenfeld. It's really good. You should buy it at the end. Cool. Like to cite my sources if possible. It's probably the only source I'll cite. Great. Where was it? Follow your feet, but coach if you can. Right? Okay, sweet. Acting on Impulse. Cool. Yeah, and this is actually, so that's the first place I think a spark can come from. It's like from your body. And this is also actually how I do a lot of narrative improv. It just means telling one story from beginning to end. And this is actually the method that I try to follow and teach and write about in the book, Very Slowly Writing, for doing narrative. Plot and narrative get a bad rap because you think that, you shouldn't be thinking about what you're going to do next. You should live in the moment, and I totally agree with that. But sometimes if you're standing on the side, your body will tell you what the next narrative move is. And I make those jumps to the next move in the story when I feel like immediately I know what happens next. And so that's when I make those jumps. So it's following inspiration. It's the same as anything else. And I want to talk about something that's... Wait, why did people laugh? What did I do? Fuck. I want to talk about something that's a little bit controversial, which is suggestion taking. Although the idea that taking a suggestion is controversial in improv is ridiculous. But let's talk it out. Sweet. So some people don't like to take a suggestion. Some people insist dogmatically on taking the very first word that is said. Some people like to fish for suggestions. Here's my take on that. And I'll tell you a story about the first time I actually encountered Keith Johnstone in the wild. My group, Parallelogram of Phonograph, he was in a forest. It was frightening. No, it's not true. He was in San Francisco. I took a 4-hour workshop from him, and he gave the speech that I have since learned he gives every time he teaches a workshop, but that's fine. He's an old man. And he basically said, suggestions are terrible and no one should take them, and here's why. He claims that most people take suggestions because they want to prove to the audience that what they're doing is completely improvised. And he said that's a terrible reason to take a suggestion because they'll never believe you anyway. If you do something brilliant, they'll assume that you scripted it beforehand. But the really shitty thing is that if you do something terrible, they'll also assume you scripted it beforehand or at least knew the basic beats of it. And so, like, how awful of a thing is that the audience believes that this thing you failed to create on stage was somehow planned in advance. So that's a terrifying. This is like shades of your speech, Bryan. But yeah. But he said, if you do take a suggestion, the only reason you should take a suggestion is to take something that inspires you. And he said, but no one will ever do that because people are too cowardly to go on stage and say, we'd like a suggestion that inspires us, and then accept only a suggestion that inspires them. So of course my group, we were less than 1 year old at the time, we're like, yeah, fuck you, old man. We're gonna be the one group in the world that asks for a suggestion that inspires us, which of course is exactly what he wanted us to do, but we didn't know it at the time. So he tricked us. He was a wily old Johnstone. So that's what we've started to do when we take suggestions. As a baseline, you have to do it carefully because you don't want the audience to feel like you're rejecting them. But so you have to say, like, we'd like a location to start our show in. Can we get a bunch of ideas? Just shout them all out now. And they shout them all out, and you're like, cool, I really liked Forrest. That inspired me. Let's do it. And you do that. And the reason for that is because you can take one suggestion that will inspire a show. Absolutely. But you have to do work to bring it to this place where someone is jazzed about it. And whether you do that through a group game or you do it through discovery in the opening moments of the scene, that's totally fine. With me, I like to have a suggestion that I'm really jazzed about at the beginning so that we hit the ground running, and that can fuel a fire that lets the whole show go. Now, that being said, there are shows that require no suggestion at all. I did a show based off Grimm's fairy tales once, and we'd done so much research into the fairy tale structure that the inspiration was just the crazy shit that happens in Grimm's fairy tales. There was no need to get anything additional from the audience, so we just started cold. So that's suggestion taking. Hopefully not too controversial. But you can see it physically manifest that jolt of inspiration as well. Like if someone on stage really likes a suggestion, their eyes are going to light up. They're going to jump up and down. When we first started, we would had a cheat, a rule that someone would say, "I heard forest," and we'd all go, "You heard forest?" And they'd be like, "Yeah," and that's how we knew like, oh, they'll probably initiate the first scene because they're excited about it. I don't know if that's a cheat. Maybe it's just how you do improv. Ah, fuck. Cool. So once you have that spark, either from a suggestion or from you know exactly what's going to happen, so you move physically. You need to feed the flame of inspiration. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. It also means that you're inspired, you're on stage, and now you have to create a reality that allows your spark to live, like an environment, like oxygen needed for fire. All it really means is like if I'm inspired, it doesn't have to be a whole premise. It's just if I'm inspired to play a sea captain, I better jump up on stage and start turning a wheel real fast and talking a gruff voice so that everybody knows what the hell I'm doing. Far more easy is a way to kill the flame of inspiration, and there are so many, and so let's just be super negative for a while, and I'll talk about that. Too much structure. And this comes from like guesting with groups that are doing like narrative shows, and then they're like, in scene 1 we meet the main character, in scene 2 he falls in love, in scene 3 he loses his job, in scene 4 they encounter a monster, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? You're killing inspiration. And my voice cracked and it's super awkward. Doing too much of the same thing even. My group traveled a lot to do French farce, improvised French farce. And we had a way of inspiring us at the beginning where we just asked for an emotion that someone might have. And after we did like 8 of those shows, we'd run through all the emotions that there are. And there's just mad, sad, glad, and afraid, right? That's the 4. And then we weren't inspired anymore, so we changed it to a new method of we'd form a tableau on stage, and we'd move around until someone yelled stop, and then we'd use our physical position to inspire us. We did that for years. Last year we were doing a run of 5 shows in Australia, and after the first show we were like, I don't like that beginning anymore. So like right after the first show, we changed entirely again the way we got inspiration. So you have to constantly examine what your group is doing, and maybe you've outgrown the structure or the form that you've been doing and it's no longer inspiring to you. Bridging is another thing. It's a term we use often when we're improvising a full-length story of like, if you say, man, there's a big dance coming up, and then the next 10 scenes are all about getting ready for the dance, inspiration has been sucked out of the show. Everyone just wants to see the dance, but we're all too afraid to go there. So the way to get it back is to jump forward to the dance or even past it and then truly improvise again. Piling onto a scene that is going really well, you're on the sides and you're like, that looks like fun. That's an easy way to just stomp on the flame. Being too vague, fixing problems. And then finally, I want to say being too good, which is a really weird thing to say. But like, I've seen groups that have been together for over a decade put in a technically flawless show that is ultimately joyless and heartless because they're within their own safety zone. So that's the other thing. I think these sparks of inspiration come in the realm of being on the edge of failure and risk. So I feel like the best shows to me are the ones that feel like, man, that could have fallen apart at any time, but it didn't, and it was amazing. Being willing to just fall flat on your face and then somehow pulling it out because you love and trust the people around you. Those are the big things for me. Finally, I want to talk about one specific exercise. So if this speech seems super rambly and you don't remember any of it, I'm going to give you a practical thing you can do so that it's super useful. And it's just, it's a 2-person exercise. It's called Nope. And you have, this teaches you to block and deny. Good night. You go on an adventure together, or you basically do a scene together. So you have 2 people. One person says, what comes first? And the other person says, we fly kites. And if you like that, you give a brief nod and then you mime flying kites. And flying kites. And then you say, what comes next? And the other person says, we lose our kites. And that bums you out, so you decide you don't want to do that. And you say, nope. It's very important you say nope very gently with an uptick of your voice, and you lift your eyebrows in a gentle nope. And then, now that you've done that, they ask you what comes next. And you say, our kite's getting crossed, and then we fall in love. And they say, yeah, okay. And then you do that. And it goes back and forth. And what it does is it trains you to figure out what excites you and what inspires you. And more importantly, it trains you what kind of moves inspire the other person. And you can even say nope if you feel like the other person isn't into the idea they just said. So you learn to attune with each other. So that's my practical portion of my speech. And those are my rambly thoughts on inspiration. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Roy. Wonderful. So, everybody, Justin's going to play another song for us. And again, it's justinswallow.com. If you want some of this music anywhere else, do you have any shows coming up or anywhere you can see you live? Cool. So just stalk them online, Facebook, and those things. I'll get out of your way. Take it away, Justin.
In the shade of an old oak tree, I had the selfish idea to go back to sleep, but I fought every urge and I sat still and hoped to be free. All the lies that I tell, they come back to me in a wake of regret that could sober me. And redemption, it came with the sun and the summer breeze. Oh, I'd like to be out on the road with my guitar and one change of clothes, and I'd like to be whole. Last night I thought of calling you, but the notion wore thin when I heard the tune that brought me back to those times in Lacey's room. Oh, I'd like to be out on the road with my guitar and one change of clothes, and I'd like to be somewhere my thoughts can breathe and troubles don't follow me. The heavy shit goes down with the sea, and my load is light and free.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Justin Swallow. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Roy. My heart is full and warm, Casey. Full and warm. Cool. So, God,
Like a hot pocket in there.
yeah, it's less gross than like a normal hot pocket, but I know what you mean. It's like a nice. It is a very nice thing inside right now. Gosh, we have one more speaker left.
Yes, Mr. John Ratliff.
Thank you. Thank you, Casey. Roy, I just wanted to remark that the last 2 shows my group Dervish played at the Hideout, we dogmatically went with the first suggestion we got. Those suggestions were respectively toilet and poo. And those were good shows. So Cody asked me to name this talk before I had any idea what I was talking about, and I gave him the extremely silly name Who Arted, because it was the dumbest pun I could think of, and also because it actually reflects the actual attitude you get from certain improvisers when you talk about art, and they make a face like something smells bad, and they will let you slide unless you keep doing it, or you get too noisy about it, and then they get irritated. So I kind of want to address that that kind of knee-jerk reaction. Not everyone has it, but that reaction was like, I'm not doing art, that's ridiculous, and kind of examine maybe where that comes from. And so maybe attempt 2 things. 1, to convince you that if you're an improviser, you are actually an artist. And 2, that might not be a bad thing. I will fail at both of these. That's fine. So for the purposes, well, I mean, one thing I wanted to mention was I think there are a lot of good reasons for this instinct. One is comedians, by definition, are aware that it is very easy to make fun of something that someone takes seriously. And so one of the ways we protect ourselves is we try not to show that we're taking anything seriously. So even though you have people who are devoting hundreds of hours, thousands of hours to working on something, they don't actually want to come out in public and say, this is really important to me. Because then someone could make fun of them for doing that. Guess what? They can make fun of you anyway. You know? Broad City, most recently, made fun of you for doing improv. But it is, I think it's a form of self-protection. It's like we don't want to be considered pretentious. And the other thing is there's a very practical consideration, is like people can point to it and say, when people get pretentious about art, they produce shitty work. And that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. The problem is doing the opposite also produces shitty work. I've seen plenty of pretentious art theater pieces that were terrible. I've also seen plenty of improv shows that were terrible because people didn't give a shit. And they were not committed to doing something really great, and they weren't prepared to commit to it. So I would say that one's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But those are, I think, like legitimate objections to saying, I am an artist. So for the purposes of this discussion, I don't want to get into an argument about what's art and what's not, but for the purposes of this discussion, I would like to say that art is a set of standards or parameters that you've decided on, and a certain amount of truth or honesty. So that's pretty broad and encompassing, but we'll examine that further. So we open on that door from the exterior right after a movie Riot show. And the crowd is coming out of the movie Riot show, and their faces are red and wet with tears of laughter. And they are saying, that is, those guys are amazing. That's the funniest thing I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like that before. That was fantastic. We pan 10 feet to the left to see Movie Riot standing around one of the picnic tables. Carlos is vaping. And they all have kind of grave expressions on their face. And we move closer and we hear someone saying, God, man, we forgot to bring back the crippled dwarf from the first scene. And Kirk turns to Lance and says, dude, I'm really sorry I endowed you with like pissing fire in that last thing. I didn't realize it was green spooge. And I've heard them have conversations like this. And part of me wants to say, you guys, nobody fucking cares if you tied up the plot. Like, everyone loved that show. That was a great show. But I also get it. Because Movie Riot has standards. They are trying to do the best possible show they can. And they are concerned with getting better. And they do that by looking at what they did and seeing how they can do better. It's not that it doesn't matter that the audience liked it, loved it. It's that they have a different standard. And so I would argue that in terms of craft, that makes Movie Riot artists. Right after this show, you can watch Movie Riot beating me up in the parking lot for calling them artists. But who's an artist now, motherfucker? But I mean, that's part of it. That's part of the idea of art, is if you're trying to get better at it. And I would argue that most of the people doing improv here are actually trying to get better at it. You have a standard. You may think, oh, I'm just doing this to get the laughs, so I'm just doing it to be funny. But if anyone has ever come up to you after a show and said, not just to be nice, but said, seriously, that was a great show, and your internal response was, no, it really wasn't, I would argue you have some sort of artistic standard going on. You actually have an idea of what's good and what's not that is not completely dependent on the marketplace or whoever happened to be in the room at that time. So that's part of it. I want to veer off here into a little side kind of eddy of the general like I don't do art into a very specific form of I don't do art, which is I do comedy, I don't do theater. I am unaware of any way in which comedy can move from one person's brain to another without passing through an intervening medium. All right? Sometimes that medium is the spoken word, as in a humorous conversation or in stand-up. Sometimes it is moving images and sound, as in film or TV. Sometimes it is in the written word, as on the page, and sometimes it is in theater, as on the stage. Comedy is a genre. Theater is a circumstance whereby people come into a room and sit in seats that are all facing the same direction, looking at a space that is usually better lit than the seats, possibly raised off the stage a little, which is occupied by people who have come up here intentionally to convey something to these people. That is theater. Very much like the stage I'm standing on right now, and if you are up here doing comedy, you are also doing theater, all right? They're not mutually exclusive. And the problem with that, it wouldn't be a problem if you just like didn't want to acknowledge that, except that I think by doing that, when people insist on that, they are kind of missing out on a huge potential form of inspiration and information about how to do this. But basically, I mean, it's kind of like saying, man, I don't cook. I do flavors. It's like, well, how do you get the flavors to people? It's like, well, I put the spices on the chicken and then I heat it up. And so it's like, you're cooking. It's like, no, man, I don't cook. It's flavors. And then the person brings back the chicken and they're like, this is half cooked. And there's lumps in the potatoes. And you're like, man, don't talk to me about the fucking food, man. Just taste the flavors. It's like how you are conveying your comedy matters. It matters. And if you're doing theater, and here's a problem we run into, is that it's just a demographic problem. Most people who are doing comedy, and for seeing comedy for that matter, we've seen tens of thousands of hours of film and TV. Everyone knows what that's supposed to look like. Most people don't go see plays. And, you can't change that arbitrarily. But physically, this resembles a play much more than it does a movie or a TV show. And it's... if you want to see an example of this, Cold Town produces consistently really high-quality video sketches. Right? You look at the production values on those sketches, they're excellent because they understand that the better the production value is, the funnier it is. If you will imagine being hired to direct a comedy movie and you show up the first day of filming and your director of photography comes up to you and says, okay, we've got the second unit, they're shooting the exteriors, for the setup shot. We've got a long establishing shot. We've got a medium 2 shot, and then we've got over the shoulder reaction shots. And you go, no, we don't need any of that. We just need the medium 2 shot. We're just gonna do the whole scene of that. And he goes, why? And you go, I don't do film, I do comedy. You wouldn't have a job at the end of the day. And yet, we come in here and act like by saying, I don't do comedy, that somehow the fact of the theater just disappears. I will give you an example of it. And I am the worst person in the world to make this argument. I have no fucking theater training whatsoever. I don't even know how to do this. But we act like we're doing comedy in some kind of ethereal cloud instead of doing it in this space. And I think we're squandering a lot of opportunity by doing that. I'll give you an example. And I just want to point out, I am not remotely arguing that improv should look like scripted plays. No offense, Roy. But to me, the kind of improv that is most meaningful to me, and Roy will agree with me on this, is when improv is doing something you can't do in other mediums. When you can see that moment of the immediacy and the spontaneity and something is happening on stage and everyone in the room knows that it's happening. And sometimes that does not look like a scripted play. That's cool. I'm not saying that at all, that we should be trying to make it look like theater. I'm saying by putting a blanket statement saying, I don't do theater, we're potentially really kind of screwing ourselves by not paying attention to things that might fall under the art of theater. If we were to admit we were doing an art and admit that it actually involves theater. And people have been doing theater. People have been standing on stages in front of groups of people for thousands of years. They have figured some shit out. We do not have to reinvent the wheel every time. I just did a show called The Church of Indeterminate Divinity, and we decided we were going to decorate the set. And it's funny because we took a lot of time with it. I got a friend of mine, she printed these beautiful photographs on these giant banners, and we had Christmas lights, but she realized the banners would set off more if they were against a dark background. So she sewed a black curtain, and we hung it on this black wall. I'm on this back wall here, right? That, in theater terms, is the most basic thing you can do to a theater, right? People came to see the show. People from outside Cold Town came to see the show, and they remarked on all of this stuff. Improvisers, consistently, people who played at Cold Town would say, great show, that was really cool. Man, that black curtain was really cool, man. It looked really good in there. And it's like, if you've ever seen 3 plays in your life, that would be the first thing that occurred to you. But you're not going to get that idea from watching movies or TV. Because it's a theater thing, you know, hanging the black curtain. Also, I will remark with some sadness that instead of there being a great flowering of shows at Cold Town in which suddenly it's like, how can we decorate the space to make it unique and distinctive for our show? What we got was a series of improvisers coming up to me going, hey man, can I borrow those black curtains? So, in a way, this kind of rejection of theater is actually really appropriate to improv, because American improv came from a bunch of snotty University of Chicago people who did not like conventional theater and thought it was smug, thought it had nothing to do with their lives, did not think it spoke to them, and they were creating their own variation on that, right? So possibly a good analogy is punk rock. Punk rock did not like the music of the day, that it did, the mainstream music, said that's bullshit, it doesn't speak to us, we want to do this instead. But punk rock did not insist that it wasn't music. And in fact, there were a lot of punk rock groups when punk first came out. There were a lot of punk groups that sort of insisted that technique was inherently corrupting. That if you knew how to play your instrument, you were a fucking sellout. You're not listening to any of those groups anymore. And what you are listening to still, however many years later, 30, 35 years later, is the groups that wanted to play music, but they wanted to play it their way, but they weren't afraid to get better. And they weren't afraid to admit that they were part of a larger tradition. They just didn't want to do it the way it had been done. So there's that. And that brings us to the second part of this. How am I on time here? Yeah. So that's my argument for technique and for actually admitting that you're doing an art that might require some effort to get better at, and might require paying attention to things other than just the things that you automatically, naturally do well, right? But that punk rock idea, I think, has some currency, and that is that technique is a trap. And it is possible to do enough technique that you start to lose that authenticity. Like Roy was talking about, a group that is so good, they're no longer much fun to watch. They're putting in a technically competent performance, but there's no longer that spark there. The irony about improv is that we start out really honest. When people first come in here, they can't hide. They don't know how. They don't have any technique. And unlike a lot of other art forms, like if you're learning music, you can learn scales for a long time before you ever have to reveal anything about yourself. In improv, you get up here, it is immediately, your shit is visible on stage to everyone. But if you keep doing it for a while, you get better, and you get better at hiding. And there are a lot of improvisers who are very good at making every scene into the kind of scene they're very good at. It turns into this thing. They're not controlling anyone. They're not stage hogging. They're not steamrolling. They just, every scene winds up being the kind of scene they're good at playing at, right? And there's less idea of that immediate spontaneous moment, and there's less revelation. There's less of that honesty. So if you want the second part of the art, the first part of the art is committing to the technique and getting better at. The second part is being willing to let go of that and actually be honest on stage. And here's the thing. I think there's a paradox here, because if you ask yourself a question, why do you do improv? I mean, if you really answer it honestly, I think it's going to fall into a couple of categories. If you're doing it, the superficial thing is like, when you ask people what they're doing, why they're playing music, it's like, it's to get laid and to make a lot of money. Those cannot possibly be your answers if you're doing improv. Or if they are, I've got some bad news for you. But I think, most comedians will admit, it's like on some level, it's like, I want to be seen. I want to be understood. I want to be admired. And really, if you get down to it, I want to be loved. I want people to love me. The irony is, we get up here, we learn how to do improv, and then we immediately start hiding. Because we're afraid if we show who we really are, we will not be loved. We will not be admired. We will not get laid. And I mean, that's a real fear that most people have. Most people have that fear. If I show who I really am, that's it. Game is over, right? But from a practical point of view, if you're trying to distinguish yourself from every other improviser in town, the one trump card you have is being yourself. No one can do that better than you. And it's the one card we refuse to play. It's the one card we spend all our time avoiding putting down. And if we played it, it's true. There's a risk there. It might be that everyone would go, ooh, gross, I don't like that person. But if that was your thing, you're golden. That's it. You're in. You have found your thing. No one can take that away from you, and no one can do it better than you. All right. So that's my pitch for approaching this as an art. I want to make it very clear, addressing now the people who are unconvinced and say, no, this is practical work for me. I want to do good work. I do not care about the art bullshit. I do not care about the spiritual bullshit. I just want to make comedy. I want it to be funny. I want people to like it. I respect your viewpoint completely. I think it's a really sensible viewpoint. And I think, seriously, it's honorable work. If you look at what people do to make money around the world, this is fucking saintly by comparison, right? We're improving the quality of life in the world, low use of resources. It's good. Right? So you are doing honorable work if you do that. I respect what you're doing. You cannot borrow the fucking curtains. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this episode of Got Your Back's Comedy Nerd Out. We want to say thank you for watching. If you'd like to check out more episodes from us at Got Your Back Podcast, you can go to gybpodcast.com for episodes, or you can search for Got Your Back on whatever podcasting service you use. iTunes, Stitcher, we're on all of them. If you could drop us a rate and review, we would also appreciate that as well.